Welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'll be your host, and this podcast exists to help you improve your communication skills. Whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we know that when we improve our communication skills as leaders, it exponentially changes everything. It improves our relationships, it improves our leadership skills, and it improves our business skills. So let's get ready to dive into this next episode. Well, do you want to be a better public speaker? You give presentations, you stand in front of audiences, whether small or large, and you just wonder, how can I continue to grow in my communication? The question that we ask a lot on this podcast is, do you currently ask for feedback? Does feedback even matter? Will it even help you transform your communication? Well, if you speak regularly in front of people, it is important to grow your gift of public speaking. And many of us stay stagnant because we're too afraid to ask for feedback. Well, today we're going to dive into an incredible conversation with an incredible leader who has been communicating up front for a long, long time. I've been waiting for this episode for months. I am very honored to have Ashley on the podcast. She is a nonprofit leader. She's worked in the public school system. I mean, I could go on and on about her credentials, but more important than that, she's just an amazing communicator, an amazing person, and I'm honored to have her on the podcast. Welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I'm pumped to be here.
Absolutely. Well, hey, before we hop into our conversation, maybe you could just walk our listeners through a little bit more of your story, who you are, what you do, what's kind of got you to this place.
Okay, yeah. I mean, growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher. Like, I never played Baby Barbie Wedding House. I played teacher. I had a whole school room set up in my basement. I made the neighbors come to school on their days off of school, and I would give them homework, get mad if they didn't do it because I wanted to grade it. Like, I just loved learning, and I loved transmitting information to people, especially if I was excited about the information, then I needed them to be excited about the information. And so my whole life, I knew I wanted to do that. And so I started my career in the public schools, a middle school health education teacher. So I got to teach all of the fun stuff. Not only did I get a lot of reps of teaching, but I got a lot of reps of how to talk about hard things, awkward things, a lot of classroom management that had to be learned in the midst of having these type of conversations. And I loved it. I was also a high school soccer coach. And then I transferred into working full-time in the church as a youth director, youth pastor, and loved that as well. Did that for several years, led for a decade at a nonprofit that creates resources for anyone who works with the next generation. I led their whole middle school department.
Wow.
Hosted a few podcasts, wrote a book called Communicating to Middle Schoolers. Shameless plug.
There it is. I love it.
Beautiful book. Communicating to Middle Schoolers. After 20 years, I'm like, I learned a lot. I'm still learning because the middle schoolers are changing. And man, it feels like an endless journey, which I'm just so happy to still be on. Have a nonprofit that I co-lead with my Ethiopian ministry partner. It resides in Ethiopia. And so that's been really, really cool. And then pretty recently, I launched a consulting agency called Make It Middle School, and we do a lot of ministry coaching, coaching for educators, specifically on becoming great communicators to middle schoolers. And I'm really loving that. I travel and speak around the country, whether it's in the school system, at a nonprofit, a business organization, with parents, in the church, in the community, and I love it. I love telling people something that I'm really excited about and I really, really believe in, and I think will actually make their life better.
Wow. And if I did a little bit of the research too, you're a little bit of a soccer fan. Is that a correct?
I am a little soccer fan. Yes, I played through college.
Wow.
I played at Kent State University and then coached for several years after as well. So
that's incredible.
And traveling around the world, I'm glad I played soccer.
Yes.
Because every single culture I go to, we can talk about football.
Yes.
And I can play with them. So even if we can't always speak the same language, we can play the same game.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just random today. I opened up Facebook and a student that I'd coached in Little League years ago just signed with Kent State. It was like, oh, wow, Kent
Cool.
State twice in one day.
Nice.
So playing baseball.
Love that.
So very exciting.
It's a great baseball team.
Yes. Ted Lasso fan at all? I mean, talk about football. I mean,
Yeah, totally. Totally. Who's not?
absolutely. Well, I love that you specifically uh, speak to and help adults speak to middle schoolers, because the response I've gotten over so many years is, why would you speak to middle schoolers? They're such an awkward, awful, horrible audience to speak to. And I'm like, no, it's actually pretty delightful. They're human beings just like you.
Totally. And when you learn about like the developmental changes that are happening in their brain as their brain does like a complete rewiring during puberty, you're like, oh my gosh, what an opportunity to hardwire truths into their brain that are really hard to undo later in life if you truly believe these things and you keep saying them to them. It's just a really unique phase of a kid's life and development that and I understand they're not an easy group to communicate to. Trust me, I understand that from personal experience. I love communicating to other age groups as well, but I try to hone in on that because there aren't a lot of people who set out to communicate to that age group. And I really think that they matter. And I see a ton of return on investment in that age group specifically. Maybe sometimes for a few decades it takes to see the fruit, but
Sure.
it comes back around.
Absolutely. Craziest random story. I just reconnected with a woman on Facebook who was in my youth group in the mid 1990s. And we've been friends for 20 years. I didn't even realize it because, you have so many friends or whatever. And she is a trainer and does development teaching like I do in companies. And she like gave me a master class on the phone the other day. And she's talking about, middle school youth group from the 1990s. I'm like, talk about go back in time.
I love that. That's amazing.
That's just great. Okay, so thousands of times you've been, up in front of either middle school students, adults, communicating. Speak to our listeners who are like, oh, okay, I'm still just trying to get over the crazy nerves in my stomach, the sweat that starts to roll down my back, the churning. Does that ever go away? Like, talk to us about, that experience, because for some of us, we're just trying to, get through that part.
Listen, I have good news and bad news for you, at least in my experience.
Yes.
The bad news is it doesn't really ever go away in my experience. Like, I still, to this day, after 20 years of communicating to people, I still get really nervous. I still am pacing before I talk. I still feel like sometimes I don't know what happens in my brain. I don't know if it's like a lot of head balls in soccer or what it is, but it's just like my own story goes out the window. I'm like, this is my story. I lived in this. Like, what do you mean I don't even know how this goes? Like, I don't know. The nerves, the anxiety, it's still there. The good news is I think this is normal. I've talked to a lot of communicators who have been doing this for a very long time, and they also feel that way. And sometimes, yes, things get easier. But I think sometimes it's because we know as communicators the weight of what we're teaching. We believe in the importance of what we're teaching. And we know we want to do a good job of making sure we're best representing the information and making sure we connect it to the audience. So good news, it's normal. Bad news, you might have to deal with it for life.
Absolutely. Wow. That's incredible. So that next step then, one of the best ways that we can get some immediate feedback, even from ourselves, is watching or listening to yourself communicating. Walk us through that. Is that important? Is it awkward? Is it scary? Is it helpful? What do you think?
One, it's torture because who doesn't like the sound of their voice? Or should I say, who does like the sound of their voice? Nobody. Everybody's voice bothers them. I'm always like, I watch myself and I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my face? Why am I pacing again? How many times did I just touch my hair? Oh my gosh. Did I just, like, am I that hard on my S's? Like, you rip yourself apart when you self-evaluate after you communicate. But the truth is self-evaluation is imperative to growth because you can say the hard things to yourself. And then you have the power to make those changes. Probably the best gift I ever received, both of my degrees are in education. And as an educator, you are forced to self-evaluate all the time and evaluate other people's teaching techniques. So we were forced to record ourselves, watch ourselves, give a report on ourselves. We were forced to ask other people for feedback. And so you kind of just have to get used to it. And then as you become a teacher, multiple times every quarter, the principal or the vice principal or the central office staff, they're sitting in your classroom evaluating you and telling you what you did great, what you need to change. So you kind of just have to get used to it. And so I would say, like, I'm harder on myself than anyone else could ever be on me. So self-evaluation, although it's torture, it's also imperative for growth, because I can say what's hard and then I have the ability to work on it, grow in it, change, watch somebody else who's really good at it to figure out how I can adapt that to myself. And I'm definitely harder on myself than anybody else would ever be. And I will say, like, I worked on staff, Andy Stanley's staff at North Point, and he's one of my heroes of communication. He's one of the best pastors and preachers I've ever met, because he takes a really large concept. He's able to break it down to make it make sense for any age group, really. And when I learned that he still to this day listens to his talks to make sure he can refine them, I'm like, oh man, if Andy Stanley's doing that, then I better keep doing that. Like, I've never arrived. I still need to watch and make some adjustments. And so I think it's important. Self-evaluation is really, really important. And the things that I always ask myself when self-evaluating are like, ask myself, how did I feel about how it went first? Like, overall, before I talk to anybody else, because I need to know, like, my initial reaction to that talk. I might feel like it went well and everyone in the room's like, that bombed. We have some problems there. I ask myself, what do I want to repeat next time? And then what do I want to change next time? What's one thing I can focus on changing? And I think that's important in feedback, is we have to identify what we did well if we're ever going to intentionally repeat it. Otherwise, we won't repeat it because we didn't realize we did it well. And so often when we do self-evaluation, we only talk about what we want to change as opposed to what we absolutely need to do again. And then what's one thing that we can focus on for next time.
Wow. So much to unpack there. That's pure genius. Go back to Stanley for a second. I mean, I just wish he could alliterate better. He could, just take... It's just amazing what he does. He's a magician with words. I'm like, what is happening?
Really gifted. He's really gifted.
You said something that sent off a flag when you talked about no one likes their voice. It's so true. I was on a walk maybe about 6 months ago, and I had interviewed a guy in the podcast, Matthew Dix. He's written a bunch of books on stories, and he was talking about how his mom had died, and that generation, my parents' generation, they're still the ones that you're not going to find too much online about them. My generation, Gen X, for whatever reason, we've flooded the online with every picture of our kids and, all of that kind of stuff. But he said, there's no more hard drive to her stories. There's no, I can't hear her voice again, and it hit me, as much as I don't like my voice, my wife sure does. My kids sure do, so just, it was that reminder, even from that morning, I was like, okay, I may hate my voice, but there are some people who love it. And,
I will also say this could be because I am a female communicator. And one of the biggest things that female communicators are told is the sound of their voice annoys people, or it's too high, or it's too shrill, or it got too loud and high pitched. And so female communicators, especially if you're listening and you've ever been told that, know that every single one of us has been told that. And unfortunately, you can't control the sound of your voice. It is who you are. But I think it's becoming more normal for female voices to be heard and projected, and people to get over the fact that it is not a male voice.
Right.
So.
Right. I love that. Oh, thank you for saying that. I love that. Go back to sports for a second. What's really interesting to me is it feels like 99% of people get that you have to practice if you're going to be better in sports. Tiger Woods, the stories are endless of his practice and, all the athletes. Caitlin Clark did not get where she is by just shooting, a 3-pointer a day. Why is it sometimes as communicators, I get pushback when I coach I coach leaders who want to be better. I'm like, hey, you've got to practice. Come back to me after you've done your whole message 10 times. And they're like, 10 times? Like, what are, like, it's so interesting though. Sometimes in this field, people push back on the practice when it's a no duh in soccer. It's a no duh in baseball. It's a no duh in, those kind of things. But as a leader, it's like, no, practice is pretty helpful. Like, do you have any routines or, pre-routines, or even when you're preparing, any of those kind of things that are just those disciplines that help you as, as you're getting ready?
Totally. I mean, repetition is key. Anytime in weightlifting, reps, like you do 10 reps, 3 sets of 10 reps, right? And then you get stronger, and then you increase the weight and you increase the reps. Like the same thing is true for weightlifting. And so it's absolutely the case when it comes to communicating, especially like if you're, depending on who you're communicating to, really matters in this as well. But like making sure a joke lands, making sure you're telling a story and not including details that don't actually matter or that are way too personal and people don't actually care about. Or have you even connected how that story relates to the message you're trying to send to your colleagues? And so I think, I mean, if you're in one of your repetition, what I always tell people that I coach when as communicators is like literally face a wall, like get your almost nose to a wall and speak your talk into the wall, because it bounces back and you can actually hear yourself saying it, and you will hear the dead spots when you're talking. You will hear where something doesn't make sense. For me personally, I always use my phone, and when I'm ready to do the talk, before I start memorizing my talk, I'll do the talk and I'll record it on a voice memo. I'll do the talk and then I listen to my voice memo back, because I can then hear where the dead spots are. I can be like, I just totally lost my place in that part. I don't know that transition well enough, or I did not make that connection well enough, or that felt like a dead energy spot. I'm going to take that out, or I'm going to put that after I give the bottom line of my message. And so, I mean, the design of the message is just as important as the delivery of the message. But as you're practicing and getting reps in on the delivery, it might change some of the design, and that's okay. You just have to, practice it enough so that you feel like every time you're changing subjects or taking people to a new place, the transition should be answering the question they're naturally asking in their head. That's how the science of learning works. So that's what I listen for personally.
Wow. Wow. That's absolutely incredible. I absolutely love that. So what I volunteer, I was a youth pastor forever. I volunteer now with a youth group. I have a group of boys, and, the youth pastors will ask me, hey, can you give me some critique on your message? And sometimes I think that's great. I don't know if it was Andy Stanley who said it, or I don't know if he references his seminary professor that said, experience is great. Evaluated experience is key. Like, go through it, get the whole evaluation. I would almost rather help somebody on the front end, because the back end's great. Yeah, we could talk about your pacing. We could talk about your voice. We could talk about this didn't make sense and your big idea didn't come through. But like the prep on the beginning, how do you put together the structure? How do you do that? I guess where I'm going with all of this is, how do you find the right people as a communicator to ask for feedback? Because especially, I mean, take pastors, for example. I thought it was always hilarious as I got up in front Sundays and I taught, and then I would get feedback, which is great. But most of the feedback I would get from people are people who will never experience standing in front of people. They'll just never do it. They have lots of ideas and opinions, and we should listen to them. So who do you go to? Who's the best? How do you kind of build that team? How do you kind of seek out that team to get that feedback?
That's a great question. Man, asking for feedback is terrifying. And it's so different, in my opinion, than asking for like affirmation that I did a good job. Like
Yes.
It really is a
Yes.
different mindset. For me personally, I have 6 people that are on my roster of who I always go to. And this isn't necessarily the same 6 people as much as these are, quote, roles of wherever it is that I'm teaching, whether it's in the school system, at a business, a nonprofit, the church. Like, these are the people that I go to. The first is, if somebody changed my slides for me, I ask them, how did I do in cueing you in transitioning my slides? because that's feedback for me. Did I need that on the slide? Did I get lost on that slide? Did I even know what I was saying? Like, why is that in front of the room? If I didn't do a good job of cueing it, either the slide needs to go or I need to say something different when that slide is in front of me. So I asked the slide person, how did I do in cueing my transitions? The second person I ask is the leader. I ask, like, what's one thing you want me to focus on for the next time I do this talk, whether it's the next service I'm preaching or the next time I'm doing this training. What's one thing? Because we can very easily get overwhelmed if there's 10 things. So I always ask, tell me one thing I can improve for next time. The third thing is I ask in my context, for example, I teach a lot of times to students. And so I always ask a small group leader who had a conversation with a group of 10 students after my talk. After they have their small group, I go up and say, how was your conversation? Because I can feel great about my conversation. But if the entire point of my message never landed with the people that I created that message for, then it wasn't a good talk. Something is missing. And so I always ask, how did the conversation go? And so maybe for you, you're communicating to a group of people that you're teaching them to be sales reps for a specific product or a specific organization or brand or something. Like, I would follow up with those people and ask, like, how did that person's presentation go? Or what other questions did you get when you gave the presentation? Because you're basically trying to figure out, is the end user, the person, getting what you need them to get? The fourth person I ask is an expert of who's in the room. For example, if I'm teaching to a room full of youth pastors, I'm going to ask a youth pastor for any feedback. If I'm teaching to a room full of teachers, educators, I'm going to ask an educator for feedback. If I'm teaching to a room full of middle schoolers, I'm going to go to a middle school expert, not just anybody. Because the way we communicate, and I think we'll get to this maybe later, you should be changing how you communicate based on who you're communicating to. So you should be asking for feedback from somebody who is an expert at that group of people you're communicating to make sure you're communicating in a way that they hear it. 5, I ask somebody who knows me really well. Was I myself up there? Did I seem like myself? Is it the same Ashley that you get across a coffee table as I was on that stage? Because that matters to me. I'm my best communicator when I'm me. I've had to learn that, and it's been a long journey. And then last but not least, a mentor of mine, somebody who's been coaching me or who have already given permission to speak into not just the way I communicate, but maybe my development as a leader, and ask if there was anything like, what's something you think I should absolutely do again? What's one thing I should focus on for improving next time? And I can give you so many examples of people and times that people gave me this information or gave me feedback in these categories. And it has been so huge in my development.
Wow. I mean, that's an amazingly detailed list that, brings all those different perspectives. Lately, I travel a lot with my 20-year-old son, and I just wish he had a little more empathy, because he is really quick to say, your hand's in your pocket too much. Stop tugging on that. Stop doing that.
I mean, they'll tell you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they have
your kids will tell you.
Because, you get to a certain level. Like, I can remember the first time, it was like night and day. I stood in front of 80 kids, and I'm telling a story, and I could see the emotions in the room flowing. Like, there was the first laughter and then tears, and you're like, oh, wow, okay. This communication thing really is a gift. Like, this is crazy. And then you get to a place where you're in front of 500 kids or 1,000 kids or, 2,000 people at a convention. And it's natural, I think, to be like, oh, yeah, like, I'm kind of a big deal. Like, wow, look what I do. You need those people in your life that are like, hey, no, you just still got to be you up there. What are you doing? Like, why are you pretending to be somebody else? I mean, it's just so important.
It's so true. And I mean, it's in those conversations you figure out, what do I need to repeat? What's one thing I can change for next time? And I mean, I still remember to this day when I was 22 years old, I'm 40 now. When I was 22 years old, I was teaching, and my principal, Ralph Billings, shout out Ralph, came to observe me as a teacher. And I was teaching a lesson to 7th graders on secondhand smoke. Okay. Cause health teacher. And I remember afterwards, he met with me immediately to give me feedback on my lesson. And he said to me, I think that you could get middle schoolers excited about the lint between their toes. I don't know how you just got middle schoolers excited to learn about secondhand smoke, but they were very excited. And in that moment, I remember thinking, not just did he encourage me, and I needed that encouragement as I was building my, confidence, but I remember basically him pointing out what I did well was I was excited about what I was talking about, and they matched my excitement and my energy level. And what it taught me was if I really mean what I'm saying, I should let them know I mean it, because then they're going to match me with that type of energy. I have never forgotten that feedback ever. And every time I stand on a stage or in front of a room or in front of a group, I'm thinking about that feedback from Ralph Billings.
Wow. 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 Go back for a second, because you talked about and such an incredibly important part, but getting to that place where I mean, for me, I know for many years I had imposter syndrome. I wanted to be the deepest speaker. I wanted people to walk away being wowed by my theology or my intense, philosophical thoughts. And I had to get to a place where I'm like, that's not me. So many communicators go through that. Like, we're trying to be somebody that we're not. How do we just get to that place? I know it's a giant question, but where you can just be you. Like you're like you talked about. I'm just talking to you across the table at coffee. Like, you come across that way. Because for me, like when I coach people, I'm like, it doesn't matter if you're in front of thousands or one. When you learn how to just be you, and you could just walk up and go, okay, So how's that been in your journey?
I wish I could say I've arrived, but I'm still on the journey. But I've learned a lot along the way, and
Yeah.
I will say, it has been a hard journey, because I've worked for one of, the most influential churches in the nation. I've worked for one of the largest parachurch organizations. I work alongside the best communicators I have ever seen. And it is so intimidating. Some of the people who have mentored me, Daniel Strickland, Jeff Henderson, like these are Tom Shefchunas, these are people who are incredible communicators. And they're listening to me talk, giving me feedback. And I'm like, I want to pee my pants right now, because it's so much pressure that you put on yourself. Because I remember when I first started teaching at North Point, there's a very specific way they communicate to every age group in the church. And so it felt like I had to fit within this box. And in my head, I'm like, okay, I can kind of fit in the box, but I also want to add to the box. Am I allowed to add to the box? Or is this not a place I can add to the box? And so I had to go through this very real thing of like, okay, I can do what they're asking specifically, but how do I be me in doing that? I know it's like it's a little different. And I think the truth is a lot of times when we stand up to communicate, we're communicating thinking it's going to get us an opportunity in another organization, or it's going to get us opportunity on another stage, or this person's in the room and I want to impress them. And what I've learned along the way is all of that could be true, but when that's the focus, you miss the people you're communicating to. And so if your focus isn't who you're communicating to, but why you're communicating, it totally changes the way you communicate. And in terms of like self-reflection and feedback from people who love me, I have realized when I can catch myself when I am trying to be the kind of communicator that I'm not, or trying to meet standards that just aren't a way I measure myself, because that's not who I am as a communicator. I am not like myself on those stages or in front of those people. I can tell I lose my train of thought. I can tell I'm not comfortable. I don't have the energy or the like laughing at myself that I can bring. And I've learned, so that's one thing I've learned. The other thing, thanks to amazing people who have invested in me, is they've helped call out the things I do bring to the table, the things that I have that are a gift or that are unique to me as a communicator. And like I'm thinking specifically, Jeff Henderson took like a whole cohort of female communicators and invested in us and helped us try to become better communicators. And he has like this assessment. It's like, find your speaker voice. And so basically and it's a free assessment you can take. We can drop it in the show notes so everybody can take it. But just learning about where am I gifted as a motivator and a storyteller? What are the easiest parts of my message for me to create? And then what are the other parts of the message that are required or the lesson that are required that maybe might be more difficult for me to create or communicate, that I need to supplement or, spend extra time creating in order to have a full, designed message. So like those type of tools, the latest even being, I'm going to throw out Erwin McManus.
Oh,
I just was at the Global Leadership Summit, and his brand new book, I think it's only available on pre-order right now, but
yes.
we got an early edition, so I've been able to
Wow.
read it. And it's about the 7 frequencies of communication. It's absolutely unbelievable. Have you had a chance to read this yet, Jason?
I have not. I've listened to every podcast where he's talked about it, so I can't wait.
Okay,
I can't wait to get it.
You need to get him on this pod because he was incredible at the Global Leadership Summit, and I love it. So like any kind of tool like this where it's like, okay, so if there are 7 frequencies that we communicate on, what is the frequency I usually communicate on? What are the frequencies I cannot hear when somebody's communicating on those frequencies? And you start to grow in self-awareness. So I'm the type, teacher, hello, I love tests. So I'm like, give me every personality assessment. Like I'm certified as a working genius facilitator because I'm like, yes, I want to know where I best contribute to the workflow process. I want to understand what makes me me. And those tools, and I remember my good friend Mark Ostreicher, who is years ahead of me in leadership and communicating, said to me, do everything you can. I remember my 30th birthday, I asked him, what should I do as I enter my 30s? And he said, do everything you can to figure out who you are and why you are the way you are and what you bring to the table. Because if you don't, you will spend your 30s and your 40s and your 50s wasting time. And then in your 60s or whatever, you'll look back and think, man, I wish I would have known this then. And I feel like it's made me a better communication. Sorry. It's made me a better communicator on all fronts when I'm like, this is who I am. And honestly, the communicators we believe and want to follow are the communicators we actually believe that they believe what they're saying.
Yep. Wow. Whew. Oh man.
Help me off my soapbox, Jason.
Man.
Help me off my soapbox.
So good. My wrist is tired from furiously taking notes. Like,
Can I share one unconventional way I have gotten more comfortable with feedback?
Absolutely.
And asking for specific feedback? Okay, you're not going to see this coming. Are you ready for it?
Okay.
I watch America's Got Talent, American Idol, and The Voice, not for the acts, but for the judges. I watch them watch some amazing things and some not amazing things. And they on the spot have to come up with, here's what you did great, even though you sucked. And here's one thing you should focus on next time. The things they're able to see and call out have made me better in front of people. And I'm like, I love watching people. Hello, how brave you have to be to stand up in front of the world and show them your talent and stand in front of a panel of judges who are going to give you feedback. And I think that has made me such a better feedback giver and a better person I know how to ask for feedback differently because I'm thinking about all the different areas in which feedback can be given.
Wow.
So,
boy, I love that. I watch them as well. I watch them though because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. I'm a massive feeler, and I just cry. I cry like those people who like you judge them from the first second, and they're never, and then. They just captivate a room. I'm like, I live for those moments. I'm like, every human being on the planet should get the gold confetti moment at least just once.
Golden buzzer. Yeah.
I just love it. I tried out for AGT once.
Listen, I don't have like a gift that would qualify for any of those shows, but I am like the hype girl. So if anybody listening is going to try out and you need a hype girl, I'm in for the journey. Like I have studied these shows since American Idol first season, Kelly Clarkson. I was a freshman in college when this was happening and I ran home from my night class to see if she was going to win. So I'm like, I have been there since the beginning and I've studied them. So I will go with you on your journey.
I love it. I did kind of comedy, but I said, I'm a storyteller. So I did it virtually and I had the whole place laughing. It was a lot of fun. I didn't get picked obviously, but it was great. Do you remember when Nightbird was on
oh
AGT?
Yeah, she was really good from Columbus, Ohio.
Tears, just nuts.
I know.
It's just nuts.
Yeah, she was.
So last question, you and I could probably talk. I feel like we've probably known each other forever. We really haven't. Somehow we've kind of been, online acquaintances and a lot of the same circles. Marco's been a mentor, love him. He's been a guest on this podcast. Tried to get Jeff Henderson. I asked him when his last book came out, and it wasn't able. But you brought up Jeff Henderson and that coaching. How important is it to get in those kind of communities where you are coached, where you have that kind of challenging to grow and get that kind of feedback? Because it's one thing to ask somebody that but then when you're actually paying for a coach, or you're stepping into a community where it's like you're rubbing shoulders with people who are like, I don't want to just do okay. Like I want to do really well here and get feedback. So walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who communicates for a living should invest in themselves as a communicator. With a coach who can bring a unique angle to the table. And you might be with one coach for 2 years, and then you switch to another coach who can bring out a different part of your development. And so for me, I've had several very significant people who have done that, but I will not forget. I mean, Jeff was leading the church, and he would come and watch me preach in the middle school environment. And the next day in my email, I would have an entire write-up of my talk. And I'm like, you're the person everybody's looking to this weekend, and you're here showing up for me to give me feedback because you see something in me. And I'm so grateful for that. And I remember one specific piece of feedback, again, that I will try to always repeat. It's because I was myself. He said, you're very easy to like when you're talking. He said, and people will listen to people they like. So keep being yourself because you're likable. And then he said, make sure next time, focus more on your landing statement to help them imagine how this could impact their future. And which was such good, helpful feedback. And by the way, I've shared a few like positive things people have, told me, but like between Jeff and Danielle and Chef and the list goes on. There has been also feedback where I come off the stage and I remember Chef going, hey, don't smile when you're telling that story. You're talking about a murder. You're not talking about puppies. You look like a serial killer when you're smiling talking about that. And I was like, oh, was I? Sorry. You know what I mean? Like, that's good feedback. I didn't have time because it was between like my message, like the times I was giving it, the reps I was giving it. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. I probably did look like a serial killer. And then he would ask, like, you paced way too much at this point in the talk. Like, you can, move back and forth, but when you're making that point, stop in the middle and slow down to physically make that point. And I was like, oh, that's really good. And somebody else gave me the feedback, like, hey, that TV's on stage with you, but it feels like it's just like this background noise. You're never interacting with it. Think about when you're making the point, step back. And when the bottom line comes on the screen, show them the TV and interact with it in the room. And so or I remember Danielle Strickland, Women's Speaker Collective, shout out to them because they do huge coaching cohorts that are so helpful. I remember she gave me the feedback of when I'm starting a message or going into a story, don't even say to them, hey, I'm going to tell you a story about, just tell them, describe it, act as if they're there. And I'm like, that was such a small 1% tweak that really makes a big difference in keeping the interest of the people you're speaking to. So I am grateful for all of the funny, hard things that have been said to me. And I mean, I still to this day want to keep growing. I'm passionate about it. I'm not the best communicator textbook. I'm the best Ashley communicator that I can be, at least at this point in my career. And I'm grateful for that. And I think anyone who feels called to communicate should become the best version of them, not just a textbook version of what they think they need to be. And I think you need a coach. I think you need to invest in yourself in that way. And I really think they're going to help pull something out of you that somebody who is not committed and paid to do, that they just don't have that margin or time to give you.
Wow. I love that. I was in an elevator once with Danielle Strickland and I fell apart. Like I wanted to, let her know, man, you're speaking, your leadership, your writing has meant the world to me. And it was just more like, I'm like, I definitely got that little bit of awestruck. She could tell I having a difficult time communicating.
She's amazing.
I,
She's amazing.
I
I
love it.
believe I believe what she says. I think that's like some of my favorite communicators, Christine Kane, Bob Goff, Danielle Strickland. Like when the way they communicate, I believe them. I believe that they believe what they're saying. And for me, that's the frequency that I need to hear from. So,
Wow. That's so good. That's so good. I got some feedback recently on my interviewing skills, and a friend called me and was like, "Love the podcast. I had to stop listening though for a couple episodes because you groan a lot during it. Like you just make these weird noises." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "People will say something profound, and you'll go, you know." And,
oh my gosh.
and he's right. Like I was like, yeah, I do. I make some weird noises because I have that past in the church world, and sometimes we say those kind of things. We're like, that's good. So I've had to watch my moaning. So it's a,
That's hilarious.
it's
And
an awkward.
that's awesome that that person gave you that feedback. So,
Absolutely. Well, hey, I mean, again, we could go on and on. I can't thank you enough for your time. Before I let you go, let me ask you some rapid fire questions. We're building this communication skills library. So 150 plus guests. We put their favorites, speakers and resources and all that kind of stuff on this document. Anybody can access it. It's hopefully it's a great resource to leaders. So let me ask you, if you had to, this is a tough one, but is there a speaker who you just, boy, every time they communicate, you just resonate? You want to pass that message on to somebody. You want to send the YouTube clip on. Is there somebody that just kind of falls into that camp for you?
oh, a couple of different people. I have to pick one.
I mean, if you got to do a couple,
Okay,
great.
I'll
But
pick one. I'm gonna pick Jay Shetty. I could listen to him talk all day long, and I love his whole thing about he wants to make wisdom go viral, and he pulls from like all different faiths and beliefs, and I just every time he talks, I see so much wisdom in what he's saying, and the way he says it is so palpable. So I really, really admire him as a communicator.
I love that. Is there a podcast, either guilty pleasure or development, that you listen to it and you're like, oh, I got to send that to a friend. I got to keep listening to the next episode.
I don't really listen to the same podcast weekly. I listen based on like what are they talking about or who are they interviewing? Not so like it doesn't matter whose podcast it is. If I see something like that, I listen to that episode. But I've been listening, if I had to pick a certain show, the two that really I've been spending a lot of time are Jay Shetty's podcast. And then the Working Genius podcast, because I am a certified facilitator. So I love hearing Patrick Lencioni talk about it. And I really feel like it's a tool that every single person in the education world, the ministry world, corporate America, everybody should be
Absolutely.
using this tool. It can make everybody better. So I love learning about it.
And is there a book that, you meet a leader and you say, if you could only read one book for the rest of your life, it's this book?
You're making me pick one
I
book.
know. This is challenging.
Okay, well, I'm gonna pick. I just finished reading Erwin McManus's book, Seven Frequencies of Communication, because I think every leader in every field could benefit from understanding the type of communicator they are and the frequency in which they're communicating and the frequency in which the people they're communicating to might communicate and why that matters. So I would say that I also on another front, Jay Shetty's book, Think Like a Monk.
I love it.
I love that book so much. I've listened to it multiple times, and I say that because it's basically about mastering the mind and mastering, like, if you want to learn how to be good at basketball, you study, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. If you want to be the best songwriter, you study Taylor Swift. And he's like, if you want to learn how to control your mind and master the mind, you study the monk who's given their life to it. And he went and was a monk for 3 years before leaving to become a traveling speaker. And I just think there are so many things he shares in it that are like every leader needs to work on that area, the way they communicate and the way that they think about things and
Absolutely.
master their mind.
It's huge. I just interviewed an amazing woman from Phoenix, Dr. Anna Melican, and she wrote a book called The Mindset Zone. And it was just, it's just amazing. It was just amazing. I love it. Well, tell us where we can find you. Where's the best place to go online, get more information? We're going to post all this in our Facebook group, in our email, in everything that we do. But
you can go to my website, ashleybohens.com, or I'm pretty active on Instagram and Facebook. So if you DM me, I will respond. So reach out. I'd love to continue the conversation. If you're interested to learn about anything I talked about more, I would be happy to fill you in.
Oh, absolutely love it. And thank you for your time. This was absolutely brilliant. And just an honor. Love following you for many years. Appreciate all you've done to help so many people. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. You're awesome. I love what you're doing. Keep going.
Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Speak with People podcast. We hope that you were encouraged. We hope that you were inspired and challenged to improve your communication skills. I want to thank you again for being a part of the Speak with People podcast community. Make sure you don't miss out on being a part of the Speak with People Facebook community group. Just head to Facebook, type in Speak with People, scroll down and join our community, because every single day we're encouraging each other. We're helping each other to improve our communication skills. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.